people often use and misuse the term metagame. Have we developed one?
Yes and no. The answer is yes. We have developed a metagame, and we'll get into that in a minute. But what we haven't developed is an evolving metagame. We aren't... For those who aren't familiar with the concept of an evolving metagame, the evolving metagame is a very much a tournament construct, because what it is it says, well, this deck was the best deck last week. I'm going to modify my deck to be stronger against that deck. And so an evolving metagame is a situation where there's this sort of constant churn of what powers are rising and what powers are falling, and how you constantly are tweaking your deck to what you think is going to be brought next week. Tournament Magic is a very predictive game. You will be very successful if you can figure out what is going to be played next week.
Yeah.
You're not so you will be very successful if you figured out what was played last week and how to beat it. But that's actually not as good as knowing, well, if I go into this next environment, have I tuned my deck for the expected matchups? Will I win? Will I steal games because my sideboard or main deck tech choices are particularly well suited to the matches I actually ended up playing?
Has an interdict in it, for example.
It has an interdict. Well, it has an interdict in it in a situation where the other players are all playing very combo-oriented or very activated or ability-oriented decks. We absolutely have not developed that. There is, at least from my perspective, there is nobody saying, Scott's been playing Daxos a lot, I should put more enchantment removal in my, whichever deck I'm running this week. We aren't... Tournament Magic is very different in that, when you leave a tournament, you spend a lot of time dwelling on your games, and in particular your losses. I have losses from literally Odyssey block that to this day I still dwell on. I'm like, I made that terrible play there, and that cost me a chance that that was in the semifinals of a PTQ top 8, and that cost me a chance at a thing. I still dwell on those. There is no Commander game I have ever left, and a week later I'm like, oh my god, I should not have made that play, or I had the wrong line there, or whatever. Every once in a while I'll be like, a week later I'll be like, oh my god, that was still totally amazing, but that's a totally separate problem. So there's not a, oh my god, Scott's Daxos deck beat me this week, I need to make sure next week that I am equipped to play it. And so we don't have an evolving metagame. We aren't constantly changing up. Our decks get changed. The main way our decks change is a new set comes out and we see 2 cards in it that we're like, that'll be awesome in Heliod.
Right.
We never tweak our decks for what we're doing. I mean, we tweak our decks occasionally, and if I'm like, that card was way less fun than I thought, I'm pulling it out and finding something else. But we never tweak it based on our opponent. We do, however, have a very strong metagame. And I think Scott, I'll be interested in Scott's take on this next week, but because Scott summed it up as, we treat Commander like a board game. Magic is at its roots a board game, but Tournament Magic is kind of not. It doesn't follow the rules, sort of the unspoken rules of board gaming. Especially board gaming. Obviously, the rules of board gaming at extremely high levels, deeply competitive Scrabble or whatever, are different. But there are some basic assumptions of board gaming that I think are very pervasive in our metagame. It's concepts like, we don't tend to pick on the player who's obviously struggling, which is true of board gaming too. In a board game, you tend to go for the leader, because you're trying to bring whoever's in the lead down so that you can overtake them at the end. And we apply that to Commander too, even though the end of Commander is a little less defined than most board games. Most board games have an end state that you reach after a certain time.
Mars has been terraformed.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so, there's lessons. It's actually a stronger play to take out the leader in Mars because you just want to be on top at a certain point. Whereas for Commander, leaving alone the person who's struggling is often risky because then they can become an unstoppable power and end the game themselves. But we tend to follow that philosophy. You will tend to see that one game this on Thursday accepted, the game tends to end with all of us still mostly in it.
Yeah.
Like 3 turns before the end of the game, the 4 of us will probably all still be playing.
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah, because and this is sort of part of this sort of board game ethos where it's like everybody sort of is in till the end, and then we figure out who won.
Yeah.
We also follow that also brings along certain other metagame implications. We all tend to play slower decks. This is actually a problem for me because our second game on Thursdays tends to start around 10. I'm like, well,
Right.
let's make it a quick game, and it never is.
Right.
And I'm like, well, let me grab my quick deck, and I don't have any quick decks.
Right.
We tend to all play very board gamey style. There's a lot of rattlesnaking. There's a lot of sort of individual threats, but not unstoppable combos. There's a lot of sort of more very gradual push and pull. Somebody's in the lead, but that somebody is usually struggling to maintain that lead.